You will definitely have a choice seat. Yeah, that was Rick. All right, yeah. Okay, we'll begin then. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos and our worship service for Sunday, January 2nd, 2022. My name is Felicia Orth. I'm a worship associate for this congregation. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your life's journey, you are a welcome part of our community. The sermon you will hear this morning was originally delivered by our Minister Emeritus, the Reverend Dr. Dale Arnink, in August 2005. Dale was our called minister from 1976 to 2000, and our Minister Emeritus from then until his passing on November 3rd, when a few of us, Joyce Nichols and I in particular, who had had the privilege of listening to many of Dale's sermons over the years, realized that in the days after his passing, we felt the need to revisit this sermon in particular, which we had on cassette tapes. We wanted to share it with all of you. Welcome everyone here and everyone online to our worship. Thank you for joining us. Our call to worship this morning is by Gretchen Haley. There is nothing you need to bring with you to be welcome here. No right beliefs or proof of citizenship, no eternal optimism or clarity of conviction, no boundless courage or endless expertise. You do not need to know what brought you here or how you will solve that problem you are turning over and over in your mind. Your bills do not need to be paid, and your checkbook can be a mess. Your children may have been up all night. Your hearing aids may not be working, and your knees may be creaking. You do not need to be perfect or even halfway to belong in this circle where grace meets us where we are, but does not leave us as it found us. Where love resides in each of us, yet is somehow more than all, where life still pulses and rages and heals and transforms, creating us and this day anew once again. Come, let us worship together. We also have a chalice lighting this morning, adapted from a lighting written by Celia Thurston. I light this chalice for you, Dale, for all the times you lit this chalice, for every time you struck the match or flicked the zapper or empowered a nervous parishioner to do the same. I light this chalice for all you've done, for all you fostered and cultivated and nudged, for all you suggested and directed and maneuvered. I light this chalice for the intensity of your reactions in responding to grace and rejecting mediocrity within that tender balance between tradition and choice. I light this chalice for you being here out of calling, out of commitment, out of love. I light this chalice for the time you spent preaching and hurting and healing. I light this chalice for you. We give voice to our affirmation each week to remind ourselves why we come together and of the promises we make to each other and to the larger community. Please join in speaking our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together. Thank you. A candle has been lit this morning for Kok Young's sister, Dr. Ying Kok Moy, who underwent colectomy this week in Malaysia. She came through the surgery well, and Kok Young just showed me a picture of her sitting up in her hospital bed, watching her own church service. Other candles have been lit for concerns and prayers that are left unspoken. Each of us has joys and sorrows written on our hearts. Please join me in prayer or reflection while we share a moment of silence. Dale Arnink's personal theology was one of bracing humanism, as you'll hear in the sermon. In place of a prayer, let's take a moment now to reflect on his profound humanity in service to this congregation. He was called to this church in 1976 as a young philosophy professor from Colorado. Dale delivered consistently thoughtful sermons as our called minister and later as our Minister Emeritus, including several years into his retirement, in which he returned at a time when we very much needed him as our interim minister. He engaged with the important issues in this church, in the denomination, in the community, and in the wider world. This included teaching philosophy at the local university, serving on several nonprofit boards, such as Aspen Ridge, Los Alamos Living Treasures, serving the prison population early in his tenure at the New Mexico State Penitentiary, serving the Unitarian Universalist Mountain Desert District and the Russell Lockwood Leadership School, robust support and involvement with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, which does its good works all over the planet. The MDD for many years presented an award funded by special donors in this congregation to the minister delivering the best humanist sermon each year. That ended only this year. Nearly 15 years after his retirement, his dedicated service to the new building project here helped bring us into this beautiful and welcoming space. There's a lot more to say about Dale's ministry in Los Alamos. We plan to put photographs and more history on the church webpage. We'll let you know when that's done. As Joyce and I were reviewing the photographs for a potential slideshow this morning, it became clear that it would have been distracting. So you will not see a slideshow this morning. For now, let's hold the memory of Dale's amazing grace in our hearts. We'll listen to this anthem. In the original service, Dale had Amazing Grace played twice, once before his sermon and once afterwards. So we'll listen to this anthem and then to the sermon.
We rational people have very little control of our emotions. So I'm not going to say anything personal either. Like Valerie, I felt like not coming this morning. When I'm through with my talk, I want the music to be played again, since you didn't get a chance to do the solo part. Remind me if I forget. Amazing Grace, a great traditional tune, although not really very old. It was composed by a slave dealer, captain of a ship who dealt in slaves, and he finally woke up and decided not to do that anymore, and out of that experience he wrote Amazing Grace. Did you notice in the first line of the hymn, Amazing Grace, that saved a wretch like me? There's an asterisk, so that you Unitarians could say that saved a soul like me. We Unitarian Universalists do not think of ourselves as wretches. There's another reference to being blind further on, and we are people who see. In fact, we think we see better than anybody else. And then there's this line, that grace that taught me to fear. Now that's an unusual thing. All of these phrases, whether consciously or not, reflect Orthodox Christianity. And I, along with probably many of you, have rejected the doctrine of grace reflected in Orthodox Christianity. behind these words, there are some Christian beliefs which I think are really harmful. And so I do not respect them, although I would respect the people who share those beliefs. I want to explain a bit today my rejection and propose an alternative view of grace which has been alive in our tradition and is still alive today. And I'll be alternating from the Orthodox view to our heretical view, back and forth. My sermon today does not have 1, 2, 3 points. It's a bit scrambled. And if you get confused, just remember I'm moving back and forth between the Orthodox and our heretical viewpoint. And first of all, I want to acknowledge that there are many Christianities. And while criticizing one version of Christianity, I run the risk of offending Christians of another sort. I remind you that Unitarians and Universalists began as 100% Christians, although heretical. The humanist part came much later. Wilfred Cantwell Smith is a historian of religions, and I agree with his persuasive argument that one cannot define any of the major religions because their variety exceeds definition or short description. But within Christianity, there has been a major tradition, one in which I was raised, that argues that humans are wretches, blind and depraved wretches. And the only hope for such desperately needy humans is salvation by the grace of God expressed through Jesus the Christ. Grace saves us from sinful mortality. The Apostle Paul says, "You are saved by grace, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God." I refer you to Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2. "And you he made alive when you were dead through the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of darkness, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. Among these we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, following the desires of the body and mind, and so we were by nature children of wrath like the rest of humankind. But God, who is rich in mercy, out of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead through our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised up with Christ, and made us sit with him in the heavenly places in Jesus Christ, that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God. Not because of works, lest any man should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." And if you want more, read his letter to the Romans. This is a short version of Romans. "You are saved by grace, and that not of your own doing, lest you boast. It is the gift of God." And a typical you ought to interrupt the Apostle Paul and say, "Hey, don't I have anything to do about this?" And Paul would say, "No, you do not. It has been foreordained by God that some will be saved by grace." These last words, the foreordained part, along with other verses, has been taken to mean that this whole scenario of individual salvation was predestined from eternity. And Unitarian and Universalist Christians in our early history rejected this view of humanity as depraved, and thus were counted as unorthodox, heretical. But they asserted, and UUs ought to be asserting today, that humans are not depraved. We do better ourselves, and we don't start out from the lowest point, most of us. Our unorthodox tradition is reflected currently in the first of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, which asserts that we respect the inherent worth and dignity of all individuals. And further, there are the activist principles of good works, aspects reflected in our desire to make peace in the world, for example, or to bring a working democracy, not only from our families up through all the structures of society. Moreover, Unitarian Universalists have said that Jesus' life is more important than his death. Poor old Paul never says anything about Jesus' life. He is focused obsessively on Jesus' death. We say Paul is wrong. Jesus' example and his teachings led to his death, and his death illustrated his radical message. That is good Orthodox Unitarian Universalism. So, in summary, I'm rejecting a Christian tradition that says grace, first and foremost, means a special gift of God, salvation, that is highlighted and contrasted with the dark depravity of the sinful and helpless nature of humans. And you know, of course, that in a more general sense, in Orthodox Christianity, grace means all the blessings, that is, all the good things of life, they come from God, although we don't deserve them. And bad things are merely what we deserve, and sometimes God lets them happen. Sometimes they're even curses from God. Our tradition does not hold to those beliefs. On the other hand, I have always had a penchant for wanting to reinterpret theological words. What did they really mean? What kind of experience led to that kind of vocabulary? And even the distasteful words or beliefs may have some kind of truth behind them. And many Unitarian Universalists have tried to rescue the word grace, for example, from the Orthodox and claim it as our own. And grace is one of those words. And in our tradition, Unitarian Universalism has said that grace is the goodness of reality, the blessings bestowed by life. Many UUs follow our tradition with a wider view of grace attributed to deity. Some of you in this congregation hold that view. Others of us, and I'm one of those, ask, can there be grace without God? And we say, yes, of course there can be. There is grace without God. Life, or reality, or the universe, or this world abounds with graciousness. Life gives. Life forgives. Life sheds light. We've all had aha experiences. That's grace. We are renewed and vitalized in surprising ways. Sometimes we are transformed, healed, revived. There's an idiomatic phrase, saving graces. All of these come unbidden, unexpected. Life gifts us in surprising ways. In contrast to that idea that grace is of God and has to do with salvation in Jesus Christ. No. Grace is of life and has to do with the small and daily salvations that go on throughout our life. These are things which nourish our deepest selves. In a sense, our salvation is of grace, and it is a gift. But it goes on all the time, from all directions. What is true in the Orthodox doctrine is that the graces of life are not of our own doing. Paul was right about that. They are gifts. They are out of our control. They come to us unbidden and unexpected and as a surprise, and they result in little salvations. So I think we can reclaim the word grace, even in our time when the world is being taken over by the religious right. Recently read a book written by a fellow who spoke at General Assembly this year, who takes the words grace and reverence and finds them throughout Greek mythology and in Greek history. Reverence was the opposite of hubris, for example. But there are other uses of the word grace. Because it's not simply a theological word, I think we can reclaim it. We can still use it. I want to be able to use it. Grace is used, for example, to describe harmony and beauty and integration of elements. And so we talk about graceful architecture, for example. It's when everything comes together and you say, geez, that's nice. I like that. That does my soul good to look at this. There are graceful athletes. And sometimes when you're watching an athlete at the top of performance, it's like, wow, isn't that wonderful? There are actions which are timely and appropriate, graceful actions, appropriate to the situation and the people within the situation. There are gracious people, people who in their style of relating to others are giving and compassionate and understanding and forgiving and kind. Sonia talked about radical hospitality a couple of weeks ago. Radical hospitality is done by gracious people, people who are full of a sense of the harmony and rightness of things. And when we are the benefactors, I should say the recipients of that kind of graciousness, doesn't it feed our soul? You feel like life really is worth living and that people really are good. I looked in the dictionary, and I only have now, everything has been packed, the abridged dictionary. Even the abridged dictionary has 10 different definitions of the word grace. Such things as kindness, forgiveness, pleasing, acceptable, generosity, merciful, compassionate. And if you go to the big dictionary, you probably have some more adjectives, all of which can be used to apply to nature, events, occasions, people. Graciousness is all around us in all things. It's amazing. The song is right. Amazing grace. Unitarian Universalists, however, might be often distracted from grace. We might miss the whole thing at times because we're unorthodox. Let's look again at orthodoxy and our kind of heresy. Let's look at the 5th century in an argument between Pelagius and Augustine, or Augustine, as some people pronounce it. Pelagius was one of the last of the so-called church fathers who stood up for viewpoints which we have inherited from way back there. Pelagius argued that Jesus gave us examples and teachings about how to live. Pelagius argued that we humans have the free will and capacity and good sense to follow Jesus, even to perfection as far as Pelagius was concerned. I might disagree with him a little bit on that one, but that we have the capacity as human beings to follow Jesus' example and teachings. Augustine, on the other hand, along with Paul, Augustine had read Romans and Ephesians very carefully. Augustine argued for the utter depravity and helplessness of human beings. Biographically, that's partly because Augustine had a real problem with sex. He just couldn't give it up even when he wanted to. And he interpreted that as utter depravity and helplessness. But he justified it from Paul's writings and said, we humans are totally lost and helpless. Only God can save us through Jesus Christ, and that by grace, not of your own doing. Everybody is lost until grace is granted. Well, in that argument came a lot of issues that Unitarians even today might find interesting. It's, for example, the business of human free will versus God determining everything. Or there's the idea of grace on one side and all of nature on the other side, because God, and hence grace, have to be supernatural. They're not normal. They're not part of nature. They are supernatural. Therefore, nature itself is devoid of grace. There is no natural grace, and everything bad that happens is our fault, including earthquakes and tsunamis and things like that. Because with Adam's falling, according to Paul, you don't find that anywhere else in the Jewish tradition. Pay attention to that. Paul decided that because Adam sinned, everybody else did. The Jews don't interpret the Bible that way. And so as humans fell, Paul says all creation fell. All creation is depraved as you ugly human beings are. And finally, another dichotomy is the difference between spirit and flesh, or soul and body. The body is evil. The mind is evil. Everything natural is evil. Only the spirit or the soul can be saved. A terrible dichotomy. But in throwing out some of these dualisms that ought to be thrown out, we have emphasized human achievement and freedom. We Unitarian Universalists, especially we humanists, have thrown out not only the blesser, but the blessings as well. That Pelagian and Unitarian Universalist approach can catch us in a net of our own making, a web of earnestness and effort and achievement at being good as we can be, until we cannot see anything but our own goodness and our own achievements. We become moral athletes, trying to make it into the Olympics. Emerson, Ralph Waldo, for those of you who are new, Ralph Waldo Emerson was, for part of his life, a good Unitarian Universalist and always reflected the Unitarian version, wrote a wonderful essay called Self-Reliance. Very worth reading. But a lot of us have only stuck to the title, self-reliance. This is the creed of rugged individualism. We stand on our own 2 feet. God helps those who help themselves, and nobody has helped themselves better than I have. I am the captain of my soul, the master of my fate. We love that poem. We are what we are through our own efforts. That becomes our unspoken doctrine. That becomes our unconscious assumption. We are who we are through our own efforts. That's Pelagius taken to the extreme. There is another important theologian of the 20th century named John Lennon, who said that life is what happens to us while we're making other plans. Very profound. Life happens to us, and we moral athletes ignore that. There is so much that is important in our lives that is not our own doing, not our achievement, but of grace. The accidents of birth. What social class were you born in? What educational opportunities did you have? Have you been happy the last couple of years that you weren't born in Iraq? I take pride and pleasure in that almost every day. I don't live in Iraq. That's grace. I didn't earn that. I didn't do anything to deserve that. It just happened, like all of the accidents of birth. How about the breaks you get in life? The lucky chance, the good fortune that comes to you, the gifts that other people give you. There's a phrase in music, grace notes. The musician adds those to kind of liven up the score on the paper. Life is full of grace notes. And it isn't as though we deserve them or achieve them. They just come and make life sparkle. The kind help of other people. None of us would be where we are if kind people hadn't helped us along. Rugged individualism is another doctrine that ought to be thrown out, along with orthodoxy. But that's our doctrine, rugged individualism. It's one of the worst doctrines we carry on our shoulders. The Orthodox are right. Grace is unearned, unbidden, and unexpected. There are so many examples of grace. I hope as your mind wanders, you've been thinking of grace in your own lives. Good things that are unexpected and not achieved by our own works, they just come. If you were at Indian market this weekend, in the crowd and the chaos, isn't it wonderful that some people are polite even then? How about good sex? The flesh, the body, is not evil. Sex is grace. How about acts of kindness done to us and for us? How about people who compassionately understand things that we're struggling with? Grace. In nature, how about puppies cavorting? Isn't that wonderful? Or the ravens around here, the ravens soaring around and cutting the draft off from their buddies. How about a cat lying in the sun and rolling over so the tummy gets a little sun too? Aren't those wonderful experiences? And they come as gifts to us. Spontaneous laughter and smiles are often signs of the presence of grace. Laughter and smiles. They're reactions to things that come to us that are wonderful. So is choking up, Dick. Often, choking up is a sign of the presence of grace. I like this poem. It's by Philip Booth. Lie back, daughter. Let your head be tipped back in the cup of my hand. Gently, I will hold you. Spread your arms wide. Lie out on the stream and look high at the gulls. A dead man's float is face down. You will dive and swim soon enough where this tide water ebbs to the sea. Daughter, believe me, when you tire on the long thrash to your island, lie up and survive. As you float now where I held you and let go, remember when fear cramps your heart, what I told you, lie gently and wide to the light year stars. Lie back, and the sea will hold you. But there is another side to this. Is life cruel? Yes. I'm not trying to be Pollyannish in any way at all. Grace is never guaranteed. Grace is not everywhere and always. Life can hurt terribly. Life is seldom fair. But if one concentrates upon only those experiences, if we become skeptical and cynical and narcissistic, when those attitudes become habits, we get closed off to the graces of life. Focus upon life's cruelties and you miss the revitalizing presence of grace. Is it an indifferent universe? I think so. That, at least in the sense that there's no Santa Claus in charge of things. Life is not always and everywhere gracious. But if you mean by indifferent, there's nothing good going on for us, you're wrong. There is always something going on which is good for us, that should be noticed if we're capable. We are children of the universe. We fit in. I'm told that a poem that was very popular in the 60s and 70s was written by a Unitarian. I'm not sure. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars, and whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. You are a child of the universe. It's a good thought. Well, I know that puppies tussle with one another because they're training for adulthood. And I know that those ravens flying like that are probably doing some kind of a sexual ritual, a bonding behavior. But that isn't all. They enjoy, I am positive. Just the same way as you have sex because you're driven by hormones that release certain kind of, that is, you're driven by your genes that release certain kind of hormones. That's why you have sex. That's all. But that's not all, is it? Life never is simply this or that or the other thing. It's always more complicated than that. And good sex is one of life's graces, not just an instinct. So I've been contrasting Christian orthodoxy with major strands in our UU tradition. The death of Jesus versus the life, teachings, and example of Jesus. The fallen and depraved human nature versus the inherent goodness and educability of human nature. Salvation as one kind of cosmic event done at the time of Jesus, or salvation as a lifelong process that we always are in need of, or determinism, God's plan for life, or your own free will. And I've emphasized that the gifts of grace generally only require that we notice them, open ourselves to them, receive them with gratitude and enjoyment, so that our lives are renewed, recreated, sometimes transformed. We are saved in numerous ways throughout our lives. And one final and important form of grace that has analogies with Christian orthodoxy, the notion that salvation through Jesus' love expressed in suffering and sacrifice saves us. Again, I'm trying to reinterpret. For me, that whole notion is built upon the Hebrew prophetic idea of the suffering servant and the saving remnant. And Christianity applied the suffering servant to Jesus, and to the church they applied the notion of the saving remnant. Well, I've found a way to make this all compatible with our UU tradition. I've cobbled this together. Begin with the notion that human pain derives primarily from self-centeredness and selfishness. And self-centeredness and selfishness are very natural. Life can be cruel. We do need to take care of ourselves and stand on our own 2 feet in a sense. But when we do this, we build walls of protection and moats of isolation around ourselves. And within these walls and moats, we oscillate between exaggerated versions of who we are and extremely negative versions of who we are. Some days I feel like Superman, and some days I feel like pond scum. And so long as I'm within these walls, that's all I know about myself, in a sense. But love builds bridges. It makes connections, brings us the grace of friendship and warmth and support and gregariousness. And good people all over the world, not depraved people, not fallen humans, good people love one another all over the world. They give the gift of love to one another, and it is amazing grace. It is universal. But notice that love can and often does give until it hurts. The lover sacrifices. The giver of love suffers, and love can bring a person to extreme vulnerability. When you're loving somebody else, you often open yourself up to be hurt, to be mauled. Love is a personal sacrifice, very often. At least you parents know this. Good parenting requires sacrifice. Good parents are always vulnerable to being hurt terribly. But as the receiver of such love, I get shocked out of my self-centeredness. Wow, this isn't the way I would act. This is special. I get shocked out of my egocentrism, out of my selfishness, out of my limited view of myself, and I'm able now to take an honest look at myself more objectively. Somebody has painfully accepted me for who I am, warts and all. Now I can look at myself and say, I was accepted, so I must be acceptable. I was loved, so I must be lovable. Through this comes a maturation development which can arrive at a more objective view of who we are. Strengths and weaknesses, Superman and pond scum, but most of the time somewhere in between. This experience of love, sacrificial love, shoots holes in the egocentric predicament. Loving myself honestly, I can then unselfishly love another, even when it hurts. Having received full and honest love, despite the lover's pain, I'm able to be loving and vulnerable myself. And in this way, love is contagious. It's the best disease you can catch. And we do catch it because it is of grace. We cannot earn it. So I think this notion of the importance of sacrificial love that you find in Orthodox Christianity has a profound truth to it, a truth that reflects all of humanity and yet has only been made explicit in the Judeo-Christian tradition of the suffering servant, the saving remnant, and the sacrifice of Jesus. You say, oh, suffering is not always a bad thing. In fact, suffering is necessary to full humanity. Grace. Are you still hung up on the word? There are other words for grace if you can't reinterpret grace. My friend John Trantham, who once upon a time was minister in Las Cruces, he was raised as a very strict Baptist, and he could not stand the word grace. He used instead the word serendipitous. And he's right. The dictionary calls this the faculty of happening upon fortunate discoveries when not in search of them. Or some of you are getting very interested in Buddhism. You may have run across a Buddhist phrase about basic trust. And I think that is another term for the graces of life, basic trust. So whether you call it grace or basic goodness or serendipity, it is everywhere and for all. Can't be pursued, captured, calculated, predicted, or manipulated, but it can be prepared for and opened to. That's
Announcements. Next week, our minister, Reverend John Cullinan, returns to the pulpit with an exploration of living into intention as a person and as a community. We love seeing you in the sanctuary again. For those joining us on Sunday mornings at the church, there are a number of COVID-safe practices to follow: vax, mask, and seat reservations in order to keep the number of individuals in the building at 50. As we continue to gather in the building, we need at least 4 volunteers every week To sign up, to attend, or volunteer to help, please use the church webpage or contact the church office. If you're coming to us for the first time through video, I invite you to sign our online guest book and connect with us on our website or our Facebook page. If you have questions about this service or about our congregation, you can email our minister, Reverend Cullinan. Links to the guest book and other online connections are in the service notes below this video. If you haven't already done so, sign up for our email announcements for opportunities to connect on Sunday and during the week. This week, I will call special attention to the all-church farewell for John and Mia McLeod on Wednesday between 7 and 8, and the dinner out with UUs at the Pyramid on Friday at 5:30. Thank you. During the month of January, collected undesignated funds will be given to Esperanza Shelter for Battered Families. This shelter is in Santa Fe, Greater Santa Fe. Esperanza empowers people to live violence-free lives through protection, prevention, awareness, and education. Again, 100% of the offering in January goes to Esperanza. Please use the Givelify app on your mobile device or the link in the service notes below to make your contribution, and thank you for your generosity. Dale's focus as a philosophy professor and as a minister was often on our fourth Unitarian Universalist principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. This principle of our faith challenged us to be open to new insights, like the slave trader, based on personal experience or as a community. Let's rededicate ourselves to that responsible search in the new year and be brave enough to change if that's where our path takes us. Go in peace.